Yes.
Hello, Fred. How are you?
I'm hanging in. How you doing? That's the question.
Oh, I'm a little grayer this week.
Yes.
Okay, Jackie, ready to roll? Can you hear me?
Yes.
No, can Jackie hear me?
Oh,
I don't think so.
I can hear you.
Okay, let's roll the video, please.
Okay, it's starting now.
Okay, good.
50 years ago, I was galvanized by his speeches. That's what made me think so very, very highly of Martin Luther King. I was in awe. I had a very difficult time even taking photographs. Then looking around and seeing the inspiration and the faith that people had and their hands in prayer. And I walked around and photographed this one black lady, and she had her hands up under her chin, and that look in her eyes and the face and that smile, it was just wonderful. It was very exciting. But Dr. King's speech, I have a dream, because that's what it's all about. I have a dream. The next time I photographed Martin Luther King, I was working for the Washington Post at that time, staff photographer. When I walked into the church, and the closer I got to the pulpit, I actually got palpitation of the heart. I was so excited. And when he raised his arm and the light cascaded up his arm right to his fingertips, I went click, and I captured on film my personal feelings of Martin Luther King. And that's my favorite. It will always be my favorite out of all the thousands I've taken. Most certainly, it was devastated me that 6 weeks later he was going to be shot down, assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. That was heart-wrenching. I was crushed, and then to be sent up to 14th and U. I photographed the first person looting a store right there at the corner of 14th and U. She didn't break the windows, had a bandana on her head, reached in to grab something. I don't know what it was. I had to fight the urge not to take the photograph. That caused tremendous pain. Here's a black female, and you just instantly, microseconds, you know why she's doing it. Her grandparents, her great-grandparents, what they've been through, and this is just all automatic. Like I say, in microseconds. You take the photograph or don't you? But you're a news photographer, and most particularly since you're a black news photographer, oh yeah, you have to force yourself. Not only for that particular time, but for the next 4 or 5 days, I had to take photographs. I had to force myself to take it. I had to force myself to take it. Force myself to take it. These images and thoughts running through your mind. You understand why they're doing it, yet you know it's wrong. The next day is pandemonium because you got fire engines wailing, you got tear gas being right not too far from 15th Street. You had the cavalrymen there, photographed them at 14 with bayonets, and still trying to overcome King's assassination. And the more you hear about it and who did it and so forth, the more angry you get. It's not frustration anymore, it's after his death, that was a shockwave. That was a shockwave. That's like setting off the atomic bomb. That was a terrible thing and a terrible loss. One of the great men of the 20th century. And as time passes by, I have some of these pictures I've seen that have gotten long ago that I've taken. I still have, every now and then, the images pop up in my mind, but to just see them again, and then you feel fortunate you got some important photographs. Not just great people, but the average person, the poor person, that's what excites me more. That's what excites me more than anything. Sad, but still hopeful. I'll always be hopeful, and I'll always keep the faith regardless. Something I can't help. We've come a long way, mighty long way, and we still have a ways to go. But with Dr. Martin Luther King, I have a dream. Let's hope that this dream will eventually come to fruition. A lot of it has, and hope it continues on that upward path.
Okay.
Wow. Hello, Lucian Perkins. Lucian, at this moment, is on the lip. He is not seeing what we're seeing.
Okay, Richard, make sure Facebook is off.
Sorry, I'll make that up. I think it is off.
We're having a lot of fun with the echo
Yeah.
in the Grand Canyon. You Luddite. You're a hell of a reporter, and you are the glue that keeps this news media, hardest working man in the news media business.
And I'm a
Richard
Luddite
Pitts.
besides.
Yeah, well, you know.
Well, how do I? Oh, there's Dawn. Good. Okay. Am I still giving an echo?
No, you're fine.
No,
You have
not
to
at
just
the
mute it
moment.
when everybody else is talking.
Okay, that's good.
Can anybody hear? This is Kevin Lewis. Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Loud and
Okay.
clear, Kevin.
All right. All right.
Oh, I see you, Kevin. Good.
Great to see you all.
All right. Yeah, we're going to get started here. Let me get my act together here. Okay, we're rolling. Jackie, we have the recording on and everything.
Come on, Jackie. Speak up.
Yes, we're on. We're good. Let's go.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we're going to start then. Oh, James Estrin. Good to see you. All right. Welcome to the Journal-isms Roundtable. I'm still
There's
here.
echo again. Yeah. Yes.
So can everybody mute
Everybody else.
everybody mute themselves? Everybody.
Okay. Is there still an echo? No. Good. Okay. All right. As I was saying, welcome to the Journal-isms Roundtable. My name is Richard Prince, and I write an online column called Journal-isms. That's journal-isms.com on diversity issues in the news business. This roundtable is an extension of that. We started the roundtable in 1999 when a friend of ours was leaving to pursue a doctorate. She said, keep these going, and we have. We met every month in various restaurants in Washington, D.C. until the COVID pandemic, when we switched to Zoom. Our participation multiplied, and as you can see from looking around this Zoom, people from all around the country and sometimes around the world. So we hope to have more of these roundtables that are hybrid. That is, that we can meet in person and also have people on Zoom. So far, we've had 5 of those. The most recent one was in Chicago at the same time as the NABJ convention, but we hope to have more here in DC. We think of this as an online dinner party with the purpose to network and to learn. Some of the networking takes place in the chat room, so please feel free to make use of it. All comments are on the record, and we ask everyone to be respectful of other people's time, so please be succinct and to the point. And those of you who arrived a little early were able to see the video, thanks to Craig Herndon, of Matt Lewis, who we are remembering today, the photographer at the Washington Post, who passed away earlier this month in his early 90s. And fortunately for us, we have his son here, Kevin. And I want to start off by saying hello, Kevin, and
Hello.
asking you
Namaste.
to start things off by telling you what should we know about your dad that we may not know, and those who are unfamiliar with him. What should we take away from his life and his legacy?
Wow. Well, first I'll add, Dad was 94. It was
Yes.
10-2. He did live a long life, long, prosperous life. What to take away? His life was demonstrated in his work. One thing he taught me as a kid, he said, always told me, whatever you do, I don't care what you do, just love it. Just love it. Let that passion pour in. And in saying that, his work was his demonstration. His passion, the photography, the art that he was gifted with as he grew and felt sometimes he was too old to even do it. That was mentioned in many stories. But his mentor, Gordon Parks, had always mentioned, hey, you have it, just keep going. And that's just what he did. So his work demonstrates exactly what I would want everyone to remember, how much he loved, not just his art, but the people in his field. And that was the photographers, his bosses, Ben Bradley, how much he talked about, I remember as a kid. So his love and passion is something that I know you all know he had. Again, I repeat, it's his demonstration, and that's what he lived with.
How did he get to have Gordon Parks as his mentor?
Dad met Gordon, I think when he was at Howard, he met Gordon Parks, but his inspiration came from my great-grandfather, H.J. Lewis. Of course, his father, Matthew Lewis Sr., was a photographer for the Pittsburgh Courier, and under, of course, tutelage of his father, H.J. Lewis. But I believe, if not mistaken, it was in the early days from Howard and moving on from that he ran into Gordon Parks, and the conversation started. We have a young picture of those two together.
Oh, okay. Well, Matt was the second African-American photographer at the Washington Post after Ellsworth Davis.
Yes.
And of course, he lived and practiced his craft during a time of the civil rights movement, and also the time for the push for diversity in newsrooms. So I wanted to ask and discuss a little about how far we have come or not come in achieving diversity, sufficient diversity among our news photographers in the mainstream media and other media. So I wanted James Estrin and Achille Ramsey to sort of take over this part of the discussion and tell us where are we, and what needs to be done, and what have we accomplished so far along those lines. Achille or James?
Guess I'll start off. Thank you, Richard, for inviting me and all my
Oh,
colleagues.
yeah, please tell us. I didn't identify you fully, so give us all the particulars.
Achille Ramses, I'm the executive director of the National Press Photographers Association, and someone who's been influenced. If I didn't have the honor of actually meeting Matt Lewis, but I've been a protege of many of his initial hires at the Washington Post. Michael Ducille, Vanessa Barnes-Hillian, Craig Herndon, and I worked together at the National Associated Black Journalists Visual Task Force together. It seems like we took major strides, particularly through, I think, the height of the 90s and early 2000s, but due to the tide of demise of journalism today, with the slashing of staffs and reductions, layoffs, buyouts, and whatnot, I think we're probably at the lowest number in the industry as from, say, the beginning of Matt's career. I think still at this point, with the exception of the major newspapers such as New York Times, Washington Post, maybe Chicago, Detroit, and LA, major metropolitan papers, you have probably an average of 2 to 3, if you're lucky, Black photographers or photographers of color at all represented in any of the major newspapers these days. Jim could speak to the staffing at the New York Times, and Sandra to the Washington Post today. But I know, and when I left, I was director of photography at the Orlando Sentinel. When I retired from that paper, I didn't even have a Black photographer when I left. Had lost half of my staff. So people weren't hiring. The freelance ranks are growing, and I think particularly after the 2020 George Floyd and the year protests, Black photographers were once the spotlight was put on us again, and a lot of newspapers and news media organizations were scrambling for photographers of color, and so a lot more have risen to the top from that point. But I think more than ever, we're in a pretty dire straits in terms of representations across the country.
Okay, James, what do you want to add to that? First of all, tell us who you are, and then what you want to add to what Kelly just said. Oh, unmute, please. Unmute.
Or was just I'm James Estrin. I'm a staff photographer for the New York Times for 32 years, and I was the co-editor of our photography blog Lens for 10 years. And you know, at the Times, actually, when I got hired in 92. By 95, we were by far the most diverse department in the newspaper. We were about, by 95, half people of color. We had a staff of maybe 33, 32, but now we have a staff of about 15. Most of the work is freelancers by far. Those were retirements universally. Everyone retired. And we're now, I think, let's see, we have 3 Black, well, as of today, still 4, but Jim Wilson is retiring next week. So 3 Black photographers and 1 Asian out of 15. And in photo editors, we have 60 photo editors. 6 are Black, 3, I think there's 3 Hispanic, and several Asian, I think 6, as many as 6. But that's sort of new. Just, I think 5 years ago, Sandra, because you were at the Times, I think we had 3 Black photo editors out of like 50. So Sandra, what's your experience both at the Times and at the Washington Post? Well, I do want to throw in one thing, I'm sorry, which is this freelance thing, and where there were almost so few freelancers of color 10 years ago and not a lot of women. And we've done much better on women by work that all of us have done, but we're still lagging, I think, on photographers of color. What do you think, Sandra?
I would agree. When I joined the Times, I'm Sandra Stevenson, Deputy Director of Photography at the Washington Post. When I joined the Times in 2005, I think that was the first time really in my life that I was surrounded by more than 2 Black photographers, which was really amazing. But even more amazing, there were at least 2 female Black photographers at the Times when I was there. And in joining the Post, you know, it's still well, we started off when I joined in 2022, I think there were about 22 or 23 staff photographers, 4 Black male photographers, no Black female photographers. And even though, you know, we've had a buyout situation, we've still retained our staff of color, but I would say that where we really do lack are Black female photographers. And as far as the freelance world is concerned, in some ways, I would say, you know, social media has sort of democratized the opportunity for photographers of color to get their work out there and get their work seen. But, you know, as we all know, things ebb and flow. I think at one point, you know, I saw a high number of Black women covering stories, and now I've seen it kind of dry up a little bit, which leads me to say that we also need more people of color as photo editors, because the power really in making the editorial decisions visually starts with photo editors, and there are very few of us.
Right. And how something you worked on a lot is, you know, at the Times is representation, you know, how, you know, as opposed to using like stereotypes, cliches.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, that was a lot of work, as you know, Jim, like a lot of conversations, finding allies in the newsroom, not just peer allies, but, getting upper management to buy into it wasn't terribly easy. But by the time I left, I could at least say that we could all have a conversation, not just about who was taking the photo, what the story was, because, we certainly, my fear was always pigeonholing people into Asians can only photograph Asian stories and Black people can only photograph African American stories. Um, breaking out of that, but at least being able, for example, for the homepage to say, we have too many white guys in ties. What can we do to change the visuals up here? And the ability for everyone to have those conversations without, tears or eye rolling or, any of that was really, it was worth it. It was absolutely worth it.
Okay, Fred Sweets has his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to talk for a moment about how far we haven't gone from Matt Lewis being the first Black assistant managing editor at the Washington Post. We now have a Black director of photography at the Washington Post, but he doesn't have the title that Matt Lewis had as an AME. He's the director of photography at the Washington Post.
Who's that? Who is that?
That is Robert Miller.
Okay.
He is Black, and that's good news. If we want to talk about Chocolate City for a second, I hired a guy at the Associated Press. The largest photo bureau in the world is Washington, D.C. It is now run by a guy I hired. He's Latino. His name is Pablo Martinez Monsiváis, but there are no Black photographers on his staff. Now, the good news is he did have as an intern Stephanie Scarborough, who is Black, and now she is based in Baltimore. So there is some progress. When I came to work at the Washington Post, when I came to work at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, there were 5 Black photographers at major newspapers, and I set out to meet them all. Don Hogan Charles at the New York Times, Bernie Boston at the Washington Star. This is strange in the days of black and white, but there was Bob Black and John White in Chicago. And that may have been it. Burnett, a guy named Burnett was the first Black AP photographer.
Paul.
And it's just a sad state of affairs. Now at the Washington Post, we have what? Jahi, Marvin Joseph, Demetrius Freeman, and who we got, Sandra? Who else you got?
Joshua Lott.
Joshua Lott, based in Chicago, I do believe.
Yes.
So that's progress, but it's a sad state of affairs when you don't have Black folks on the staffs of any of these newspapers, major newspapers, not none. Estrin just mentioned who's at, but fewer than there ought to be.
Well, have they also
Miami Herald, what do we got? Carl Just, and might be it.
Yeah.
Leonard, is that true?
I think you're forgetting C.W. Griffin.
Oh, CW is still there?
I believe he is.
I know CW, but
I may be wrong, but I think he's still on staff.
Well, I hope so, because he's one of the best in the business. He and Carl. So we got 2 in Miami, got a huge population. Anyway, Matt Lewis was a pioneer, a hero. Can't say enough about him. He actually is responsible for a number of Black folks coming through there and interns. They all couldn't stay, from Milburn Orlando Brown to Craig, who else? We had a couple of other folks in between.
When there's Sharon Farmer.
Sharon Farmer.
Yeah.
And anyway.
Michelle Agins.
Michelle at the New York Times, of course. And Ruby Washington at the New York Times. And Ozira. Yeah. But those are the majors.
Right. Let me ask the very basic question, which is, what do we lose when we don't have a sufficient number of Black photographers?
A lot.
Why does it matter?
Well, there's a lot that's missing. You don't have community, or you don't have a set of eyes that can tell a different story. People look at things from their own perspective, their own knowledge and background. And for the longest, we've had, people come outside the community to cover things in our community. And there's certain subtle languages in terms of what could be offensive, not so offensive. I can't tell you the number of times, just by the fact of being around the desk as decisions were being made, pictures were being chosen, and seeing something that would be like cause a problem, to be able to say, no, we don't want to use this picture for this reason. Or finding the right person to cover a story that might need the sensitivity and understanding of, say, a Black woman or a Black male photographer. There's just so many different levels that having the right person in the right place who can make real inroads into certain communities that may not happen if we're not there.
Yeah.
I hear you. Okay, we have 9 minutes left in this segment.
Can I piggyback off that?
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Am I pronouncing Ramses? Is I'm pronouncing the last name correct? Okay. I don't know if you all remember C.T. Taylor. He was a reporter down here in Miami for many years. And I freelanced with the Miami Times throughout the years in history. And what you just said was so important, because even in his reporting, he did a story on the medians between the Coral Gables and Opelika that nobody would report on, how the wealth of the Coral Gables area would have certain type shrubbery. By the time you get to Opelika, it was sticks. And what you just said is just that when it comes to that consciousness of a Black American, male or female, to report truth about what's really going on in our community. So I thank you for sharing that, but that was one of my experiences myself. Okay. With C.T. Taylor down here, that, I thought nobody would ever report that, but he was courageous enough to do it. And it went into the papers to show the diversity and the inequality of the neighborhoods.
Okay, since we have 7 minutes, let's devote that to what can be done given the retrenchment in staffing at these newspapers. How can we address this problem given the financial and economic climate?
Well, Sandra and Achille and David Gonzalez, a few other people, we had some meetings 5 years ago with photo editors, and they came up with a list that Achille contributed a lot of. Particularly the problem we were facing was there's not a lot of staff, but there's so many freelancers. How did you deal with diversity of freelancers? And Sandra, you want to go over that, or?
People came up with a myriad of strategies, from, making sure that they're not just going to the same old person that they usually go to in their book. We brought in a specialist, Dr. Derek Gay, who was really instrumental in helping editors have those conversations. But I think the more that we get involved in like NABJ, NAHJ, even some of the newer organizations like Online News Association, and get ourselves out there to see what talents are out there. I think the opportunity, to try to grow our ranks is there. It's prime. But I do think that we, as a collective, really need to put more pressure on not just photographers, but editors, because the power in hiring is there.
All right.
One of my favorite.
Go ahead.
One of my favorite news organizations has the director of photography, ProPublica. Boiselle Hosey is in charge of that. So I just want to let you all know that there are some Black folks making strides. And
we have, there's very few, talking about beyond director, you have people who are like managing editor status. You have Denise Keenan, who's a visuals for the Philadelphia Inquirer. You have Boiselle, but even with Pablo being raised to the new position of DOP for AP, haven't they kind of like taken away some of the power of that position from the past in terms of splitting up responsibility?
I wish Pablo could be on the call with us and not be able to talk about it. But
Yeah.
I'd rather him speak to that.
But we also
For one thing, there needs to be a Black photographer in the Washington Bureau.
Yeah.
At least one man or woman or both
Right.
in this place. Then we also have Kim Floden, who is a news editor at the AP, former photographer. So she's rising in the ranks, but we're in trouble. And I'm not sure what the solution is.
Wow.
But
well, I'm working with different foundations. There's a foundation called Catchlight that is working with news organizations that don't have the budget or the staffing to hire a photographer, and they're placing photographers, and now they've extended to where they're trying to find photo editors for news organizations, where they're realizing after eliminating so much staff that they've eliminated too many, and they need people with visual literacy, visual experience. And that's the tough part. We've had groups like Diversify Photo, Black Women Photograph, come out of this lack of diversity in media, but too many of them do not have the editorial journalistic experience that is needed. And I really wish to see if we could have more paid internships, which allow more of our people to be able to afford to go into this field, because this is an expensive venture to get into if you don't have.
It is. AP killed off Diverse Visions, which was an excellent program, and produced folks like Frank Franklin, rather, who's an AP photographer in New York. But
there was, and in freelance photographers, there is.
Oh, you're getting an echo.
Okay, and with freelance photographers, they're overall, everyone is hurting profoundly in making a living. So for, someone, including photographers of color, it's hard to survive as a freelancer. And there's so few staff that, people drop off pretty quickly unless you're wealthy, unless someone is subsidizing you.
Well, Achille, you mentioned Denise Cannon at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and you're remiss if I didn't mention that last time we discussed this, they had done a series, the Black photographers at the Inquirer, about Black life in Philadelphia to show the ordinariness of it and the specialness of what they do. So it was they were able, because they were all African American, to, well, you can explain better than I.
Shout out to Monica Herndon.
Yes, second generation.
Her shy father's on the call.
Right.
She's part of that series.
Yeah, both Denise and Monica came through a program we had at NABJ, the Visual Task Force, as part of the student project. And a lot of the young Black kids have come through that program. They're the ones that are in position now. You have Brent Lewis at the New York Times. You have Denise, you have Monica, and a few more scattered around the country. But just to have, we need that stirring pot. We need a pot to be able to help develop the kids, and mentorship programs that we're developing here at MPPA to help guide some of the young photographers who have that ambition. But as you said, as freelance, editorial no longer is a profession you can subsist on just by itself. So a lot of young freelance photographers have to do a little bit of editorial, a little bit of commercial to be able to sustain themselves. And I think that's where a kind of crucial area we need to explore, how to get more of us into this field as it's tightening its ranks.
Okay. All right. Well, this is to be continued. I'm sure that there'll be other conversations at the Visual Task Force meetings or wherever. And anybody else who wants to weigh in on this topic, please feel free to use the chat room, and you can continue and come up with other ideas. Kevin, you think your dad would approve?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, without a doubt. Without a doubt. Yes, he would. In fact, I want to say thank you for allowing me to even join you all and hearing this consciousness here. It's new. I'm not on the level you all are with knowing where everyone is in the different states, but it's a beautiful thing. But I see his passion and love through you all right now. So yes, he would absolutely be it. I can feel him right now saying, all right, good job.
We'll celebrate him.
Yes, we are going to
this
celebrate.
weekend.
Yes, Saturday in McDonald, Pennsylvania. Yes, we are.
Here, here. Okay, well, thank you all the photographers for speaking up and speaking out, and please continue the conversation in the chat or among yourselves later on, because if things are as dire as you're saying, that more conversation is needed. All right, our next topic. I see Tim Richardson is here. Everybody's talking about disinformation, misinformation. Yesterday, the NAACP came out with a report about Black men and Black people in general, African Americans, and their voting preferences as determined by a survey they did. And Derek Johnson, the president, said that the number one thing holding people back in this area is misinformation and disinformation being spread to the Black community, and it's true of other communities as well. People just lie and make up stuff without shame, and a lot of people just take it in. So we have Tim here from PEN America. He could talk a little more about how that works and what journalists can do about exposing it and just dealing with that in general. So Tim, glad to have you, and please take it away.
Thanks, Richard. And Henry Hicks from Penn was also going to be here and had a conflict. And so I am going to kind of fill in for him. He does amazing work on our kind of community-based efforts to kind of create trusted messengers, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So I'm Tim Richardson, as Richard said, and thanks again, Richard, for having me. I hear a lot of Washington Post references here. I also came from the Washington Post. I was there for the past 13 years. I left in December, part of the buyouts that I heard somebody mention earlier. So this is my first kind of move into outside of daily journalism after 24 years. So it's been kind of a change of pace for me, but it's been a great kind of move, I think, as it relates to disinformation. And like you said, there's just so much of it out there that PEN is trying to do what we can to combat disinformation. And PEN America, I should talk about, just mention our organization. So we are a 102-year-old nonpartisan nonprofit focused at the intersection of literature and human rights to support free expression. We have done a lot of work, particularly starting in 2016, and we all kind of know what happened in 2016, related to work to combat disinformation. We're now in the third year of a 3-year grant. And really, we've got 3 tracks going to kind of try to combat disinformation. And there's the one that I lead, which is focused on journalism. So a colleague and I have been working with newsrooms across the country, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. I've got a slide deck that I can kind of make much more brief than what our typical session is. But our journalism sessions are roughly an hour. Henry has 2-hour sessions with community groups in his focus areas. So I'm going to kind of distill that down into a half hour or so, and of course take any questions that you all have. So Henry leads our community group, and then we have another track that works with advocacy, and particularly on Capitol Hill, trying to advocate for legislation that would hopefully slow the spread of disinformation. So I am going to share my screen. Let's see. Hopefully you can all see that. The first part is kind of what I focus on, which is the journalism and disinformation aspect, and then I'll get into the community side of things toward the end. But we felt like right now there's this kind of there's the election, and we also have these constant advancements that we're seeing with generative AI. So because of that, we felt like, and I say we also partner with another nonprofit, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. So our sessions are co-branded with ISD, and they are really the experts. It's from a research standpoint. They battle online hate speech, disinformation, and polarization. So between my background in journalism, their background in kind of the research angle of that is we've kind of combined forces to be able to talk about disinformation with reporters. So we really focus on the role that generative AI plays in that, and some of the the tactics that are out there, and then some practical tips for journalists. But this really all started a couple of years ago when we wanted to understand how disinformation was disrupting the field of journalism. We surveyed 1,000 reporters and editors, and what we learned was that 90% of reporters told us that they were altering their journalistic practices because of disinformation. 17% said they had avoided reporting out a story, fearing a fake news backlash. And 40% said that their newsrooms didn't have effective processes to cope with disinformation. And keep in mind that was a couple of years ago. So I suspect that we're even dealing with disinformation even more nowadays than we were then. But one of the things that we continue to look at is whether generative AI in particular could be used to influence voters on a large scale. And we really haven't seen that in this country to any significant level. There are other places it has been more successful. We saw the RNC, for example, back in April of 2023. It was really the first to be able to use generative AI kind of on a national political level. They created this 30-second, very dystopian ad that was completely generated by AI generated, showing San Francisco being closed because crime and fentanyl had taken over. And then even this, then back in, of course, January, we had that instance of the commission, the Democratic operative who had released the robocall that very excellently mimicked Biden's voice, saying if you voted in the primary, you couldn't vote in the general election. And then, through the summer, you've all seen this kind of deluge, I guess, of disinformation that's come from even the richest man in the world posting things that are just flat out falsehoods. So what we've found is that there really is this narrative that begins to take hold once these kinds of deep fakes are shared widely on social media, and which is one of the things we're really trying to combat. And I think you can this is a good example of just how this technology has advanced over the past few years. So using, I don't know if you're familiar with Midjourney, but it's the San Francisco-based generative AI company, and they're focused on images based off prompts that you give it. So a couple of years ago, if you would have given Midjourney the prompt that you see on your screen, a 50mm lens close-up photograph of a weary hiker in the middle of a forest, realistic portrait photography, that's the image on the left that you would have gotten. I think that's not going to probably fool anybody. That doesn't look like it's a real person. There are lots of problems there. But if you fast forward 1 year later, that person looks like he could be real, looks like it could be an actual human being. But then, let's take us into the current. And we gave Midjourney that same prompt, and this is the image that we got. And keep in mind, this person doesn't exist. He's not real, but I think that could fool anybody. And it just shows you where this technology was 2 years ago, and, kind of an indication of where we're going to be in the future. We're seeing the same sorts of advancements with voice cloning. Using just 2 seconds of me speaking, I was able to generate a clip of me giving a completely false message in Arabic, for example. And it can be as long as you want it to be. It can be in any language. And it's the same with video. It used to be that you could kind of look for these visual clues, like 6 fingers or 6 toes, or the arms not quite in the right place, and those sorts of clues that you really don't have, or at least I should say they're becoming much, much less common because the technology is just getting so much better and is able to pick up those sorts of details now. Example I like to give is earlier this year in Phoenix, the Secretary of State's office gathered a group of election workers, and they played a video that was completely AI generated, and it was obviously for educational purposes, put together by a couple of nonprofit organizations. But they played a video for everyone in attendance showing the Arizona Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes, and nobody realized that what they were watching was completely fake. And they wanted to make the point that what you see with your own eyes isn't necessarily reality. And nobody realized that what they were watching was completely AI generated, put together with these publicly available images and audio of the Secretary of State. And it wasn't until later, when they played a second video, kind of the grand reveal that what they were watching had initially wasn't real. But I talked a lot about the kind of the information landscape this year, and conversation. We say, and this is Institute of Strategic Dialogue's kind of research based off a couple of slides here, but that the conversation on social media shouldn't be assumed to be representative of what the public really cares about or is paying attention to. I mean, as you can see there, most adults are on YouTube and Facebook, but from there it really goes down significantly. And we hear so much about what someone tweeted, for example, or the narrative that's taking hold on Twitter, but really, 22% of Americans are on, of course, what is now called X, and that is a whole different story as far as just the trust and safety teams at these social media companies have been slashed. At X, it's significantly smaller than it used to be, but even at Facebook and others, it's smaller than it was back in 2020, which is really a kind of a whole different story. But we've seen that the public is kind of exhausted with news and not tuned in, and the ramifications we're all kind of seeing of that with this kind of splintered, very fractured media landscape that we're in now. But some of the disinformation tactics that we see being used are these appeals to emotions or values, particularly these kind of widely held or universal values. The one that we kind of talk about often is immigration. Regardless of where one sits on the political spectrum, there is this widespread belief that how the United States has handled border issues has not been that it could be better, and so disinformers often play to those sorts of emotions and are able to kind of spread their message based off something that people generally think has not gone well, over really decades through presidencies with both political parties. But as confirmation bias, just how people tend to believe they're bringing a set of beliefs into something that they see on social media, and we see bad actors kind of playing into that. Their worldviews are, it's easier to kind of confirm the worldview of someone rather than trying to sway those opinions, which gets us into the next step there of this repeated exposure. So, the more times that somebody is exposed to a false claim, the more likely they are to believe it, which gets into the reasons why disinformers might kind of game algorithms on social media platforms just to get their falsehoods, displayed higher and expose that to more people. And then in-group language, terms and, slangs and cultural references and these sorts of things. We spoke with the Haitian Times, for example, which, and Fact Check EATA, which is a Spanish language organization in Miami, and another in Arizona. And they are dealing with this kind of onslaught of immigration related issues. And there's kind of these cultural references are one ways that disinformers are able to do that. And also the micro-targeting of specific communities focused on, an accent, for example. The Haitian Times said, which is a whole kind of, if you remember, of course, the incidents in Springfield, Ohio. I mean, the disinformation that originated from that and kind of moved into real life as well. I mean, that organization was very much at the front of that and dealing with some of those falsehoods there. So, that's another thing that we're certainly seeing more of now. And the co-opting of trusted messengers. I think the best option, the best example there is probably Elon Musk, where a few years ago he was kind of thought of as this businessman, very wealthy, but had these great ideas, and now is completely moved into this, a different realm, one of the most political people out there, and so having someone who is apolitical or nonpartisan, and having someone who spread those sorts of messages, like spreading a message as it relates to disinformation, is very valuable to a disinformer. And of course, we have seen Elon Musk move from being nonpartisan to something that is very different from that now. But we talk a lot about how newsrooms can better serve their communities. And I think the number one thing is really pre-bunking misinformation, and that's getting ahead of it. And you know, this could look like in 2020 and now in 2024, talking about why, you know, we might not, probably won't know the results of the election Tuesday night, probably, you know, potentially on Wednesday, but that doesn't mean that there is something nefarious going on here. It means that the ballots need to be counted in various ways. This also works for things like indictments, just, you know, where there's a way that reporters can get in front of news that we know is happening. You can't always do this. Sometimes there is breaking news and there's not a lot you can do about it. But when there is an event that, you know, impeachment, indictment, those sorts of things where we sort of know the processes. We've seen a lot of success with those. Working with trusted leaders, which could be, you know, librarians, religious leaders, and others kind of along those lines. We always say to bring empathy whenever you're meeting, whenever you're talking with the public or someone who might have gone down some sort of a disinformation rabbit hole, but kind of try to relate to them as much as you can, which gets into kind of the trusted messenger work that I'll talk about here in a second. And then providing credible non-language content. If someone is a Spanish speaker, for example, and they can't find reliable content in Spanish, they're going to go somewhere like WhatsApp or Telegram or some place where there is just a ton of disinformation out there. So as much as, you know, legacy media and other outlets can provide that sort of content, that has shown to be successful. And transparency is just a huge one. I think that the more that reporters can explain the process of what they went through, explain how sources are used and anonymous sources, just some of those things that we kind of know within the journalism community, what they mean. I think a lot of people don't, and explaining those sorts of being transparent about that is really crucial. And we always say that be particularly cautious when reporting on information that elicits powerful emotions. I mean, if you feel anger and this intense anger or vindication or this intense joy, it might be that somebody is trying to play on your emotions, because that's what these sorts of campaigns do. We always suggest using the truth sandwich model when dealing with disinformation. So kind of present the falsehood, explain or present the facts, I'm sorry, and then introduce the falsehood, and then leave this lasting impression of why the truth, this lasting impression of truth, and then reporting the denominator to give a sense of scale. If you only have something that went wrong within one polling place, for example, that doesn't necessarily need to be the focus, particularly in a headline, if there are 1,000 polling places in which everything has gone right. But I want to kind of talk about our trusted messenger program too, and Henry knows this in and out, so I'm going to try to fill in for him as best as I can.
But Tim,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Let me stop you there and see
Yes.
if you have any questions on what you've said so far. If anyone does, please speak up or raise your hand. Okay, everybody's on board. There's no questions about that. All right.
Okay.
All right, go on.
Yeah. So, our trusted messenger work is really focused on 3 cities. We are in Dallas, Miami, and Phoenix, and we have consultants on the ground, organizers on the ground in each of those cities. The last thing we want to do, so Penn is based in New York, but a lot of us are also based in DC, particularly our disinformation team. So I'm based in DC, but the organization is in New York. And the last thing we want to do is swoop in from New York and DC to tell people in Miami and Dallas and Phoenix what they need to be doing and how to talk with people and have these difficult conversations. So we do work with, we have organizers on the ground who are working with communities, having these difficult conversations, more importantly, training people to have these difficult conversations, because that's, the other part of this is we can't go in and tell someone how to have a conversation with a close friend or a family member who might believe something that is not true. We need to have people on the ground who are close to those people having those conversations. So our data shows, and we've been looking at this now for this is, like I said, this is the final year of a 3-year grant, but this work has really taken place this year, and the results have been positive so far. We have people take a survey when they enter, have these conversations, and then we have another survey down the road, and it's been successful. We've found that these sorts of conversations that you're having with a friend or family member, they tend to be much more successful than, say, seeing something on social media or something from the media themselves. But so these workshops, this is an example of the workshops that we're having. Henry leads them, along with the organizer in each community. They're 2 hours long. It's really focused on educating members of the public and empowering them to have these talks that are very difficult. I mean, people come in and will have a close friend, a family member, believing something, they genuinely believe something that is just not true. And then our hope is that we can go in, help them. In most cases, our goal is to diversify their news consumption. So in a lot of cases, it might be someone who is consuming, maybe it's all right-wing media, or maybe it is all user-generated content, and it has led them to believe something that is not accurate, is not true. And our hope is that we can kind of pull them out of that rabbit hole. So yeah, this kind of gets into our getting people to change their news diets. We've found that has, kind of the best way that we can challenge those existing beliefs is to broaden their news diet, expose them to other forms of other information that is out there, and hopefully that repeated exposure, while it can be negative if it is something bad, if it's disinformation, but it also has a positive effect that if you're exposed to something over and over again, it can that can be a beneficial thing as well.
Can I ask a question?
Of course, yes.
Yeah,
please do.
What if you don't want to change your news diet? What if you want to believe these? I'm thinking about the example of the Haitians in Springfield, Ohio. Why that so many people wanted to buy into that, or the fact that migrants, all these criminal migrants are coming into this country.
Yeah.
What if they are fine with just believing that, and they don't want to be exposed to some other point of view?
This is an excellent question.
Yeah.
What we have found is nobody leaves these conversations changing their mind after one conversation. Nobody, or I shouldn't say nobody, but the vast majority of people don't leave a conversation like this changing their mind. What it does do is it is kind of the first exposure in many cases that someone might have to reality, in many of these cases. Having, if it's somebody who is consuming a certain type of media, from one particular source, they have probably, there's a good chance they have not been exposed to, the truth by someone who is very close to them. It's that closeness that it can be bad, it can be used for evil, or it can be used for good. And if someone close to you is telling you something that is false, you are more likely to believe it. But at the same time, if someone close to you is telling you something that is true, you are more likely to believe that as well. So it is very much a long process. Yeah, so there is, I will say we've had discussions with our the person who has loaned the grant organization, and they expressed that same concern with so many things. With COVID, for example, you have these clear benchmarks. If you're climate change, there are some certain things that people can do, actions they can take. They can vote, they can get vaccinated. There are these very distinct things that can happen, actionable items that can be you can take stock of and know that something worked and something didn't. Disinformation is very tricky because it's so hard to be able to quantify that. But it's a long process, is the answer to your question.
Yeah. Then my follow-up is that, suppose you don't want to, how do you get people to, if they don't want to believe the truth and they'd rather believe something that confirms their own biases, then how do you deal with that?
And how do you get them to be open to it?
Yeah, I would say that we don't have, it's not a 100% success rate. I mean, I think that's the reality. You do have people like the trusted messenger it's even outside of Penn's research and Penn's work, other organizations have found lots of success with trusted messenger programs, but that doesn't mean it works with everyone. I mean, if someone is approaching this in a manner in which they are just absolutely not open to changing their mind, to having these conversations, particularly over a period of time, I think that unfortunately reaching everyone is probably just not necessarily reality. So, but I think for a lot of people, you know, I don't want to write a large segment of the population off, because I think that they can be reached. It's just, it is a lengthy process. It's a process, and you know, you're talking with someone who maybe you will see once, you know, weekly or monthly, and it has to be kind of the right time to have this conversation. You don't just go in and say, hey, you know, I want to have this conversation with you and kind of bring this up. I mean, it really has to be the right moment. These are difficult conversations to have, but that doesn't mean that everybody can be reached, frankly.
And then can you repeat again now, what is the role of journalists in all of this?
So with journalists, we really have two different kind of you know, kind of training sessions, and I think with journalists, I mean, my hope is that the community, I should back up. So I think what I have found, so we've talked with over 100 newsrooms over the past few months. What I have found is that journalists are very much, you know, the number of journalists is down. We all know is smaller. The number of newsrooms have, you know, we've had 2,000 newspapers closed over the last 20 years or so, and they are becoming at the same time kind of this firewall against disinformation. At this, you know, there's so much disinformation out there. We're adding responsibilities for journalists at the same time their ranks are decreasing. So my hope is that the public can kind of step up, and that is where this kind of program comes in. I mean, to inform the public how they can also be kind of a firewall against disinformation. But I think the concerns that journalists have are, I would say, the number one question I get is the amplification. You know, like when to cover something, because if a journalist does cover something related to, you know, that is false, they are just by definition amplifying that concern. So I think that's probably the number one question that I get is it is a gray area, but when do you kind of take that next step and actually, you know, cover something that amplifies it with, you know, of course, with the intent of exposing people to the fact that it is false and changing their mind.
Okay, we only have 3 minutes left for this segment.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from people, from other people?
Yeah, I mean, that's really just these are some of the resources that we have available. But yeah, I think that is that's the end of my my slide deck. So
appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
You know, I had a question, Mr. Prince. I didn't know how to get my
all right, speak up. Just do it.
You know, I'm wondering, like, have you held those kinds of meetings, like with Fox News people?
We have not held them with Fox News. We have had them with some large media. I mean, it really runs the gamut of everything from large news organizations in person in DC and New York to small news organizations, small nonprofit news organizations in the Midwest. So it really does, you know, it's large and small, urban and rural, in person and virtual. I will say that we have not talked to Fox News though.
Oh, not just Fox, but any like of the like Southern small papers.
Yeah, we have, yes. There have been, I mean, I think the best example is there's an organization that has a newsroom in every state. And so, you know, I think we had a large number represented there. So yeah, I mean, it has been, it hasn't just been kind of, yeah, it really has been kind of across the board, large and small, and yes, and Southern and Northeast and Western. I mean, it really has kind of, it's been, across the board. College news media, no. The closest we spoke with the Milwaukee Neighborhood News Service, which is affiliated with Marquette, as is Wisconsin Watch, and we did speak with them, but I believe that would be the closest that we got, and I wouldn't even say that qualifies. So I think really the answer is no. We have not spoke with college media outlets.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah. There's one other question from Doreen.
Yeah.
How great is the demand for this training?
So yeah, I have and hi Doreen, I know we worked together some at the Post. I would say so. It has a lot of it has been me reaching out to people, particularly ahead of the election. So we have spoke to just over 100 newsrooms. That's not to say that I haven't given the presentation 100 times. It's probably more like 30 or 35, but some of them had multiple newsrooms in attendance. So I have set those up in advance of the election. We are not done with them. We have a couple at least that are scheduled beyond the election, but the vast majority were planned to go from, starting in the spring through November 5th. So most of that work is done. I think we will continue this work in some form after the election. But starting next year, I think we're still kind of working through exactly what that looks like. We all know that disinformation is not going away, so I hope it continues in some important format, but I don't know certainly into 2025 exactly what that looks like.
Okay. All right. If people want more information about what you're doing or how they can get involved in stopping this, because as I say, every week there's another survey that comes out that says more people are trusting social media than journalism. What should the journalists do if they want to continue to try to turn that around?
Well, I think, transparency is big. I think the pre-bunking is big, and we have a ton of resources on our website too. It's called Facts
That's what I was
Forward.
getting at. Should they go to your website, contact you personally, or what?
Yeah, so I'm at trichardson@penn.org, or you can go to PEN America and Google disinformation, and that you'll see all of our resources there, and also Facts Forward, which is our kind of either of those have a lot of our resources there, and I'm also happy to help, or email me, and certainly if I could get you in touch with Henry for any information about our community program as well. He knows a lot more than I do, but
well, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Tim. Glad to have you with us. All right, it's time for the next segment. Well, I want to welcome back Leonard Pitts Jr. Who I keep running into these pictures of Leonard when he was giving every time we have a new novel, he preview it for us at our holiday parties, and we greatly appreciated that. He finally said, "All right, the heck with this newspaper column stuff. I'm gonna write novels," and so he has. And his latest one is called 54 Miles, and takes place during the Civil Rights Movement. And I wanted Leonard to just talk. We have about 15 minutes for this segment. Just tell us about that and what you learned, and what we as journalists should be able to take away from the stuff, what you've learned with your research.
Okay, well, the first thing I'll say is that if I was smarter and better at promoting, I'd have a copy of my book on hand, but I'm actually in New York where I'm doing the audiobook for my book, and I don't have a copy, but I do have my cell phone. So yeah, where's the camera? There we go. Is it showing up? I see the blurring is working, but that gives you the general sense of what the book really, there we go. There's a sweet spot, 54 Miles. It takes place in March of 1965 in Alabama, which, as we all know, is a very momentous and portentous time. I find that the best way to tell you about what the book is about is to tell you about three characters real quickly. So the first is Luther Hayes. He's 51 years old. He's a barber. He's a World War II veteran. When he was 9 years old and his sister Selma was not quite 3, they saw their parents lynched at their front door. And this scarred Luther and really messed him up. He became a functional alcoholic, finally got himself straight. The man who led the mob that lynched, and I mean, the whole schmear, they dismembered his mom and dad, they burned them alive, the whole atrocity. And this scarred him as a child. And when we come back to him in 1965, he's finally gotten his life somewhat together. He's, as I said, an Army veteran. He's got a barbershop. He's living a sort of solitary life in this barbershop in Mobile, Alabama. And one day he's visiting a friend of his at what was then called an old folks home. And he chances upon a man who is also a resident of the old folks home. And this man is the man who led the mob that lynched his parents, this man who never saw justice. And 43 years later, this white man is helpless. He's just had a stroke. He can't speak. He can't call for help. He can't anything. And so Luther's the arc of Luther's story is, what does he do about this? What does justice look like 43 years later when you got this man who brutally murdered your parents, literally at your mercy? What do you do with that? The second character is Adam, who is Luther's nephew and Selma's son, her only son. Adam has slipped out of New York City and gone to Alabama to participate in the voting rights campaign. Gets himself brutally injured or badly injured on the Pettus Bridge, and ends up, his uncle has to go to Selma to rescue him. And while he and his uncle are together, he discovers something about himself that sort of reorients his understanding of who and what he is. He's always known that his mother was a little bit distant toward him, and they kind of had this. He knew she loved him, but he also knew that they weren't very close. She didn't hug him. She didn't talk to him. She didn't do mother things to him. And he discovers that the man he thought was his father was not really his father. But not only that, he discovers that he was the creation of a rape. He is a child of rape. Whereas he starts to somebody's looking for my book. As he begins to refer to himself as the rapist's son. He says he's not his mother's son. He's something that was done to her. So this really wrecks him. And he goes looking for the rapist's family, and he disappears. And again, this is Thank you. I appreciate that. Somebody's smart. And this is 1965. This is after Medgar. This is after Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner. This is after the 4 little girls at the Birmingham church. So when your son goes missing, your young black or mulatto, as they called them then, son goes missing in Alabama, what do you do? Well, that comes to our last character, Thelma. Thelma left the South 20 years ago, and she has never looked back. She hates Alabama. She hates everything about Alabama, not least because, one, it's where her parents were murdered, but two, it's where she endured this brutal rape. And she has vowed she ain't never going back. She had never set foot in Alabama. And then she gets the word that her son is missing. And that's what draws Thelma back to Alabama to go and search for her son, and not incidentally to face the demons that she escaped 20 years ago when she left Alabama. So that's the story. It unfolds against the backdrop of the civil rights, the last great act of the civil rights movement, the voting rights struggle. So it depicts the 3 marches, the Bloody Sunday, the turnaround Tuesday march, and then the final triumphant march into Montgomery, where Martin Luther King gives the famous the famous speech whose name is flying from my head.
I have a dream.
Thank you. No, not I Have a Dream. 1965. Gosh, it's my favorite speech. Help me, somebody. I'm on a call full of black people and nobody's helping me.
How long? Not long.
Thank you.
Anytime.
I hate these brain cramps as I get older. How long? Not long. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne, et cetera, and et cetera. But King gives that great speech. So that's my novel. And as for what I learned, I write a lot about African American history. For one reason, because it fascinates and intrigues me. I think it's a great story, and I think it's a great story seldom told. But more, I think it's even more critical now to discuss this history and to bring it alive, and not to let it sit, and molder in history books, because people are actively trying to steal our history.
Yeah,
they're trying to restrict it, restrain it, subvert it, lie about it, and make it almost impossible to teach. And so that bothers me, that angers me, to be perfectly honest about it. So the other mission of this book and of some of my other books has been, frankly, to make history more accessible. To when March 7 rolls around, you get like a 10 or 15 second clip on television of John Lewis getting his head beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but you get no sense of what it was like to be on that bridge. You get no sense of what came before that, i.e. Jimmy Lee Jackson, or what came after that, James Reeb, Viola Liuzzo, and that long 54-mile march. So I wanted to recreate that for anybody that's interested, to put people on that bridge, to put them in Selma, to put them in Alabama in 1965, and, you know, have some sense of what it was that we came through and why people were marching in the first place.
Okay, any questions? Oh, come on now.
All that, and I ain't raised a single question. I'm sitting up here almost popping sweat, and I ain't raised a single question. Come on, y'all.
I got a question.
Who's that?
Anthony Wilson.
Hello, sir.
Good job, Leonard. Is it on Kindle?
It is on Kindle. And as I said, I think I heard somebody looking for the audiobook a moment ago. I am literally recording the audiobook now, and it should be for sale on the 24th of December. They tell me it's going to be out.
Okay, so it's not on Audible. Okay.
No, because, well, I'll tell you a story about that. Frankly, I didn't like what they did on my last book. And I was complaining about the readers, and they said, fine, you do it. And so suddenly I find myself here, you know, in New York, where I'm recording the audiobook myself. So if I don't like the narration, I got no one to blame but myself this time out.
Where else can we get it besides Amazon?
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indiegogo, and Books A Million. They're all on my website, leonardpittsjr.com. They're all listed there.
How has your life changed since you left being a columnist and now an author exclusively?
You know what? I get to ignore stuff. And I am finding that such a blessing. This year, when the Republicans had their convention, my reflex was, okay, let me sit down and watch this and see what they're going to do that's going to piss me off that I'm going to have to write about. And then I realized I don't have to. Somebody else is going to watch it. Some young reporter is going to watch it, and I can read what they said. And I don't have to subject myself to it. And that has been so liberating. I keep having people say to me, don't you miss it? No. I do not miss having subject myself to this stuff or having to think about, you know, all the crazy, the hatefulness, like the thing at Madison Square the other night. I don't have to think much about that. I can see what Stephen Colbert said about it and with Jon Stewart, and I can read, you know, the accounts in the paper, and I've got quite enough. I don't need to add anything to what has been said. I'm sorry, do I sound too happy?
As you should.
As you should, that's right.
Did you find yourself, did you have to use what's the different writing disciplines you had to do that's different from your opinion column that you had to?
Well, I always tell people that writing a column is you're constrained by, you have to report the facts. You're writing your opinion based on these are the facts. In a novel, you're less concerned with the facts, although this is a historical novel, so I am bound by the historical record. But you're looking for the truth, and the truth and the facts are not always the same thing. So that's one thing. The other thing is that you have a lot more room to play in a novel. A column, there's a certain discipline that it teaches you about the economy of language. You got to get a lot of things done in 600, 700 words. You're doing a lot of stuff. In a column, you have room to stretch. I mean, in a novel, you have room to stretch out. You have room to sort of digress and go follow this down the rabbit hole or that down the rabbit hole. It's like every morning when you go to work on your novel, it's like you're going to play in this world that you created. And that is so much fun. I miss my characters when I'm done with a book, you know, because my people I'm playing with and then I'm moving around and that are talking to me, they're all gone. And I'm just eager to get started on the next one.
Well, all right.
Yes, sir.
Question?
Okay, one last question. Okay, Amal, yes.
Yeah, you just
Tell us
said
who you are first, Amal, too.
Oh, so I am a PhD candidate at Columbia, at the School of Journalism.
Nice to meet you.
But tell us about your project.
My project is about the integration of African-American reporters in mainstream newsrooms in the 1960s.
Okay.
So
sounds very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at the changes that occurred in the organization as well as the resistance to the change and the experiences of the reporters themselves. You just said something that I wanted to understand better. You said truth and facts are not always the same thing. I don't know if it's something that you can explain a little bit more.
Well, the example that I give people is using a World War II analogy, that it's a fact that Adolf Hitler, and I can't recall the dates at this point because I usually do this from a speech text, but it's a fact that Neville Chamberlain, basically gave away the Czechoslovakian Sudetenland to Adolf Hitler in the drive to kind of to forestall war. And it's a fact that he came back and waved up a piece of paper, which turned out to be meaningless, which said, "We have achieved peace for our time." Those are the facts. The truth that the world took from that is you cannot appease the bully. Okay, so when I talk about the truth, I'm talking about the lessons or the things that the facts add up to, the thing that the facts point to or that they tell you. And that to me is the purview of a novel. You can't really you can kind of get to that in a column. You can't get to it that much in a news story. But a novel, that's what it's there for. It's to talk about what are the truths that these facts lead to. So, in this novel, which is a historical novel, I'm trying to deal with certain truths that the facts of the civil rights years lead us to. Again, the novel is constrained within the March of 1965, but I'm hoping my readers, take from that or are astute enough to remember. And yes, by 2012, the Voting Rights Act, which you've just seen so heroically, fought for, was gutted. That's kind of the negative truth, I guess, that overhangs all of this. So I'm very big on trying to weave together the truths that our various facts lead us to, if that makes any sense to you.
No, that makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. Okay. I think it's a frustration on the part of many reporters, me included, that reporting the facts doesn't mean reporting the truth.
Not always, no. Especially since people often don't want to agree on what the facts are, as our previous presenter made perfectly clear. People have trouble even agreeing on the facts, much less the truth that come from the facts.
You're here. Okay, yeah. Leonard, thanks very much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you all for having me.
Where can they get a copy of this novel?
They can get it. Look on my website, leonardpittsjr.com, and click the link, and it'll show you Amazon. And if you don't want to deal with the evil empire, then there's also there's Barnes and Noble. There's Indiegogo, which I particularly like, which is a network of independent bookstores, and there's Books A Million. Those are the four major booksellers that we link to on the website.
All right. Thanks again. Okay, next up, we got Jim Trotter. The last time we had Jim with us was when he had just left the NFL, and then he later filed suit against the NFL. And then the news was earlier this month, that he reached a settlement with the NFL about insufficient diversity, racism within the ranks, and the management of the NFL. But the settlement provided for the NFL contributing to financially to training students at HBCUs in sports journalism, if I have that correct. So I want to welcome Jim back and have him explain exactly what happened and what he hopes to come from all this.
Hey,
go Bison.
Yeah, thanks for having me. First off, I thought we were friends, but I'm not so sure now. You have me following the legendary Leonard Pitts. I don't know how you do that, man.
Okay.
Yeah, let me preface everything by saying there are certain things I can speak about and certain things I can't. So I will say this to you. When I filed my lawsuit, I remember being asked, "What do you want from it?" And I said at the time, I want positive change, right? I want newsrooms to be more representative of the communities that they cover. And in particular, in this case, I was referring to the NFL network. As part of this settlement, which I can't talk about the negotiations of it and whatnot, but when I went into this lawsuit, I was determined that whatever happened, if I came out of it with any sort of monetary gains, that part of that was going to go towards scholarships and resources to help aspiring sports journalists at HBCUs. And we're going to do that. I'm in the process of, I saw you out at Howard, I believe it was last week, all the days run together. So I was out at Howard last week talking to some folks there about strategizing about what we can do. And I also created a foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, to be able to distribute funds to students who need help. My purpose is not simply to throw money at students, but it's really to try and find a way that we can make a lasting impact. And so I have asked members of my board of directors, as well as advisors and friends, to think outside the box and come up with ways that we can truly make a difference. And so I'm eager over the next few months to kind of have those conversations before we move forward. I want to move deliberately. I don't just want to jump into something. I realize a lot of eyeballs are going to be on it, and it will be heavily scrutinized. But so that's really the positive part about this settlement. I'm going to be honest, there was a part of me that did not want to settle, that I wanted to go all the way through to trial and have a jury rule one way or the other. But that was ego talking. In talking to other attorneys and people that I respect, what I had to come to the realization was there were several factors that said to me, it's worth settling, or it is a best case scenario to settle. And by that, I mean, number one, a lot of innocent people were going to get hurt if we went to trial. And by that, I mean, there were a lot of private conversations that took place, electronic conversations, and these individuals had no idea that their names might one day surface in a lawsuit and that they would be called in to have to speak to that. And some of these individuals still work at the NFL Network. Mm-hmm. And so there was a part of me that felt it was unfair to put them in that position if we were to go to trial. The other thing, based on information that I received from attorneys as well as my own, was if you go to trial, it's always a risk, that it might not go in your favor. And that even if it does go in your favor, the damages might not be more than what, let's say, someone is offering in settlement. And so if you're trying to do something positive or to make a positive out of a negative situation, you weigh those factors as well. And so for me, it was time. I personally had no problem going forward, but there are a lot of people who are impacted by it, and you start to take that into consideration.
All right. Well, you mentioned you got a board now and the friends helping you with. Who are the people who are helping you put all this together?
Well, number one, I went with people that I've known for a while and who I respect and whose mindset, if you will, is the same as mine. And that is that trying to make positive change for us. A couple of them I worked with at the NFL Network. Another one is a former player who has fought social justice causes. And then also I brought on the smartest person I know, who's my wife. So she's also on the board. And then I have friends who are advisors too, who have worked in the space of legal issues, worked in the space of servant issues. So I'm trying to listen to everybody and then ultimately make a decision that I hope will have a tremendous impact on the next generation coming up.
Okay. You have names for us too? Some of these folks?
On the board?
Yeah.
I do, but I'm not sure they want their names out there. Oh. So I would prefer to make sure that they're comfortable with it. And for all I know, maybe it has to be public. I don't know, but just for the sake of this conversation, I would prefer to get approval from them that they're okay with me putting their names out there.
Okay, all right.
But their names, I know there are people out there who want to find inroads to find negatives into this or look for something that isn't there. all of these names were filed as part of the paperwork to create the foundation. So it's not like I'm going to be switching up names down the road. It's legit. It's legit, and we're gonna try and do some good things.
Okay. All right. Anybody got questions for Jim? Has the NFL improved since your suit began? Have they improved along these lines?
No. I mean, the thing is that was part of it. When I talked about positive change, what I was told legally is that I could not force the NFL to hire a Black person in a management role in the newsroom. And for those who don't know, part of my lawsuit was because for 2 years I had been fighting with the NFL Media Group because we cover a player population that is 60 to 70% Black, and yet we had no Black managers in our newsroom. We had no Black copy editors in our newsroom, and we had no full-time Black employees on the news desk. And so I kept asking, how can we say that we are fairly covering this community when there is no one who shares their cultural or life experiences at the table when decisions are being made about how they are covered, who covers them, and what the framing of the story is? And I could never get anyone to go down that road with me, which is why it ultimately led to me asking the commissioner about it in back-to-back years at the Super Bowl. And you know, it is what it is. So like I say, you try and take a negative and turn it into a positive. And that's what I'm trying to do here is find a way to truly make some sort of positive impact.
All right. Okay. Any other questions?
My question.
I have a question.
Who was first? Okay, we have.
Go ahead.
Oh, Jason. Jason, let's go. Jason, then Al. Okay.
My question to Jim is: do you think that there really is justice for a Black person in America?
Man, that's a deep question that might be better suited for Leonard.
We're about to be here all night.
I know. I was gonna say, you know, how do you answer that in this time slot? I think a lot of it depends on how you define justice. Different people have different opinions on that. So from my own situation, all I was ever asking for was that we have some representation in the decision-making process. That's all. And the NFL stands on, or says it stands on, diversity, equity, and inclusion as core principles of its league. And so my question was, if that is true, then explain to me how we have no representation in the newsroom. No one would explain it to me. And so I just felt that as journalists, I truly believe our job is to make sure that the actions of those in power reflect their words, or that their words are reflective of their actions. In this case, it wasn't. So I kept pushing.
All right, Mel.
Well, I had a question, but another one came up. I want to ask you with what you just said. In my research, I found that in the 1960s, and some of you probably already know that, what the managers would say is that we are not hiring more Black reporters because we can't find any skilled reporters. I wonder if that's something that you heard as well. And the second question was, without getting names, I was just wondering if you had any support, if there were any, even anonymously, if there were people who said, you know, I'm with you, I just can't speak up with you, but I'm with you, or if you were alone.
Yeah, this discussion about the pipeline, I laugh because it's comical. There are many of us in the pipeline who are qualified and capable to fill those roles. So the argument, for instance, even when the NFL went through a stretch where it was not hiring Black head coaches, and it was always the argument you kept hearing was, there aren't enough in the pipeline. There aren't enough candidates in the pipeline, which was total BS. There were plenty of capable and qualified candidates in that pipeline. They simply chose not to hire them. To your second point, one of the things that was most fascinating to me during this process of filing this lawsuit and ultimately resolving it was that the things I was fighting for had nothing to do with me. Like, it wasn't going to impact me. I wasn't going to gain anything from this lawsuit. Some would say, well, monetarily, you'll gain something. Perhaps, but that wasn't what this was about. It was interesting to me that the people I was fighting for did not stand up and recognize that I was fighting for them. By that, I mean Black players, Black coaches, Black executives, because I can tell you, I could probably count on one hand the number of them that reached out to me after I filed that lawsuit. And that was kind of sobering for me, right? Because I wasn't expecting all of them to come running and say thank you or whatever. But I at least thought some of them would acknowledge what's going on here. Now, I understand a lot of them are young, and when you're young, your focus is on getting that bag and getting paid and all of that. I get it. But there are enough who know better. And so every time that they complain about how they are being covered and how they are being treated by the media, and many times they mean mainstream media, white reporters, I'm thinking, here is an opportunity for you to stand up and fight for that change. But that wasn't the case. So that was sobering for me, and disappointing. And it was also disappointing, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, to see how some Black reporters handle that, and people who called themselves journalists and chose to speak on my case, but never once reached out to me or my attorney to even ask us about the case or why we were filing it and what was involved with it. So those sort of things were eye-opening to me. But, you know, at this point, I'm trying to look forward and, again, make positive change and do something good.
Well, what do you attribute that to, though, Jim? The lack of lack of support or even consciousness among some people.
I think it's a few things, to be honest with you. But I think number one, I think, and I get in trouble for saying it, but whatever. I think white folks have done a really good job of dividing us. And I think they throw a few dollars in people's pockets and people want to protect the bag, or they're concerned about losing access someplace. And I get all of that, right? But this is what bothers me. And I was having this conversation with a young Black reporter today, and he was kind of frustrated about what he's facing in the profession today and whatnot, and how we are so divided, right? And I keep thinking back to the civil rights movement, to where we were taught that without sacrifice, there is not progress.
Right, right.
And what I see today is that we have forgotten that, or we ignore it. And as long as we're taken care of individually, it's like, hey, man, you know, I support you, but I only support you from a distance, right? I can't be tied to this because it could hurt me in terms of my money or my access. And I'm not judging you, because we're not all built the same, but I can't, it's just me. I can't get with that. I can't get with that.
Leonard, let me ask you, since you delved into the civil rights movement, did you find a different mentality among Black folks then and what you hear now from what?
You mean in terms of supporting other Black folk?
That and whatever else you want to throw in there.
Well, it's interesting you should ask that question, because we remember the civil rights years one way, but they actually were another. It was actually only a fraction of Black folk, much less white folk, that really supported Martin Luther King, particularly in the later years. And there were Black churches. I mean, we remember it as this great movement that came out of the Black churches, and it did. But there were Black churches that closed their doors to King and the civil rights movement. There were Black folk who said, you're doing too much too fast. And by the middle of the 60s, 66, 67, young Black people in particular had pulled away and were referring to King as the Lord, and had nothing, had no love for all these Black preachers. Bernice King likes to point out that when her father died, he was, according to a poll that was taken, the most despised man in America. So all that to say, you're not alone, in terms of looking for help from your own and finding yourself kind of out there for a little bit by yourself. You're not alone, feeling like you're out there on the precipice without assistance. But on the other hand, I will say that we remember Martin Luther King today. We don't remember most of those people who denigrated and called him the Lord. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do what your soul knows is right, and it is what it is. And then people come and celebrate you, later. So maybe we'll have Jim Trotter Day.
I think it's also though important to point out though that Martin Luther King was not the only civil rights leader.
No,
he's grown exponentially after his death. But at the time, you had Whitney Young, you had Roy Wilkins, you had Jim Farmer, you had Fannie Lou Hamer, you had all these other people at SNCC, and people could choose however they wanted to communicate and advance the cause. So maybe some people said these things about Martin Luther King, who was basically in the South, but there were people in other venues doing things like Whitney Young would say, I'm going to the boardrooms. The NAACP would say, I'm going to the Supreme Court with Thurgood Marshall.
Yeah, but the thing is that
he was doing his thing. SNCC was in the backwoods registering voters. So we can't put everything on the fact that they treated Martin Luther King this way because there were other people doing things who were being supported.
No, I'm saying he was the most visible. He was the one that was
visible. He was one of them. There was the Big Six.
Yeah, I remember the Big Six,
not the Big One.
I know the Big Six.
Yeah,
but
okay,
he was the sort of the marquee name there, and he was the one that people who didn't want. It wasn't just him that they didn't want to get behind. Let me clear that up. It was the whole notion of nonviolent social change. That it infuriated, that it angered a lot of people for various and sundry reasons. That's kind of the larger point.
But there was also people who wanted violent change. You had Malcolm X and the Nation.
Not Malcolm. So
complex era.
I don't think Malcolm wanted violent change. Malcolm just said, if it comes, bring it. Now there were those later who
Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael.
Exactly. There were those later who might have said it. Malcolm wasn't looking for violence. Malcolm was just saying he wasn't going to sit and let you hit him on the head.
Right.
And bring violence.
Can I have a question about to Jim about the difference between it seems like the basketball league seems to be a little bit more cohesive in fighting versus the football NFL. What do you see about that? I see more cohesion with basketball players trying to ring out diversity.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's multi-layered. The answer is multi-layered. I think number one, there are more players in the NFL. Number two, they are much younger. You have a system in the NFL where basically if the average career span is less than 4 years, by the time these young guys realize it is a business and not a game, they're out of the league. So they haven't even they haven't in some ways even matured to the point of understanding exactly what they are involved in. They think it's a family, it's a game, and everything's good. And then that first contract is up, and let's say it doesn't get renewed, and the reality hits them that this is a business. So I think when you look at the number of players, where I think there are roughly 1,900 players in the NFL, not including practice squads and whatnot, versus NBA, where you have 12 players, 30 teams, I believe. It's a significant difference. And then when you look at the age, that factors into it as well. The other thing is because of players in the NBA having longer careers and many of the star players being Black, what you have seen or what I have seen is commissioners being willing to work with them because they understand that these players have a lot of influence and a lot of power. As opposed to the NFL for many years, as you all know, the most important position on the field is the quarterback position. And for many years, we weren't allowed to play that position. And so when you talk about power positions in the NFL, it was those guys at that position. It's starting to change now. I would argue that during the summer of George Floyd, if you'll recall, the NFL had an issue with players kneeling. And after George Floyd, you saw a group of Black players, including Patrick Mahomes, get together and put together a video basically telling the NFL, you need to address this. You need to address our concerns. And it was after that that the commissioner finally came out and said, we got it wrong. He had never done it to that point. But when those players decided to join together and exercise their power, it brought change within the league in terms of forcing the commissioner to stand up and own it, that what they did to Colin Kaepernick was wrong, that they didn't listen to him. And it forced them to, all of a sudden we see end racism in the end zone. And we see these slogans, it takes all of us, in the stadiums. And we see the NFL committing $90 million to the Players Coalition. We see all of these things take place. And this is after we had owners who were saying, if you kneel, you're off my team, right? So to your question, I think it's just a matter that there are various layers to that question as to why one league is I would say, so much more socially conscious and able to speak their minds versus the NFL.
Okay, Robin Wilson Glover had a question, and so did Colette Fournier. So Robin and then Colette.
Just wondering what you went through is, as we said, pretty hard. And typically it's older folks who stand up for younger folks when it comes to something like this. But you went through pretty much hell doing this, it sounds like. Would you do it again? I mean, knowing what you know now?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I wouldn't, truthfully, I wouldn't describe it as hell for me. It was more those around me, right? And that's what bothered me. The thing that was most disappointing to me in this entire process, to be quite frank with you, was what The Athletic did to me. So after my contract was not renewed by the NFL, I interviewed with The Athletic for a position as a national columnist. And I wanted to be upfront with them because I felt that was only right. And I said to them, there is a possibility, a very strong possibility, I'm going to sue the NFL. Do you have a problem with it? They got me on the phone with the attorney, as well as the person who was interviewing me, talked it through. They told me no problem. You sue, we'll stand behind you, we'll support you. Fast forward to my decision to sue, I was given two options. One was to delay the suit and continue to write about the NFL. The second option was to file the suit and not be able to write about the NFL. And I told them, this is too important for me. I'm filing the suit. And I was not allowed to write about the NFL for a year plus.
Okay, Colette.
So that was the hard part for me. Because you took away something that I had been doing for 3 decades. You took away something for which I was known, really where I made my name. That was the most difficult part.
Did they offer you something else to write about?
Sure, I could write about anything else. I just couldn't write about the NFL.
Okay.
Jim, this is Colette Fournier. What did you do with the NFL?
I was a reporter with the NFL Media Group for 5 years.
Oh, that's very interesting. Okay. Yeah, so I was wondering how your case was communicated, and I just, really felt that tinge of pain that, other people didn't support you, and I just kind of said that we're truly divided. And I remember friends in Rochester where I met Richard Prince and many other NABJ reporters and communicators. And yeah, I just remember kind of hanging out with the guys, and they were watching football, and I never really cared for football, unfortunately. But I did, and I just, it kind of bothers me, especially the injuries. But I just remember the brothers talking about how they were just they wouldn't put Black people in significant, as significant players. They weren't really, and that was like in the 80s, I guess. And so I'm sure it's, really come a long way. But I applaud you because, I could feel the stress of of filing a suit. And it also makes me think of a photojournalist friend that I went to RIT with, Jerry Williams. Not sure of who may know Jerry, but he worked with the Philly Inquirer for a number of years. And because he came from a political family, he represented the union there at the paper. And man, they tried, he must have been there 20 years, I'd say. They tried to get rid of this brother for years. And, they were finally able to do it. But he saved his career because he went to school to get his master's, and then he ended up teaching photography. But they're out there, and our people don't necessarily support that struggle, our struggle.
Okay, I think Leonard had an interesting comment here that can't go unreported here in the chat. Why don't you tell people what you put in the chat, Leonard?
I just was listening to Jim's description of what the NFL finally belatedly came around to do, after the summer of George Floyd and after the NBA had been kind of on top of it. And I just said, it sounds like for the NFL, ending racism was more of a PR problem than it was anything that actually had any concern about the issue behind it.
No, we might chuckle about it, but you're absolutely right. That's a fact.
That's what it sounded like, yeah.
And as I say, actions speak louder than words, and all you have to do is look at their actions. I first brought up the issue of the lack of newsroom diversity it was 3 or 4 years ago, at a minimum 3, and nothing has changed. So the league office initially, when we talked about the lack of Black coaches, the league office said it had plausible deniability because we don't hire coaches. Owners hire coaches, teams hire coaches. But when it comes to the NFL media group in that newsroom, the commissioner and the league office in New York ultimately are responsible for that. So if they felt it was important, they would address it. And they didn't, and they haven't. So what does that tell you? Well, I know what it tells me, which is why I said to the commissioner, and some might have thought it was disrespectful, but a year after I first asked him that question, nothing had changed. And so the following year, when we got to that press conference again, all I could think about was James Baldwin. And when he said, I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. And so I said that to the commissioner. And then I had been told, let's see, that's February. I had been told in November, my agent had been told in November, they could see no reason my contract would not be renewed, and had even asked my agent about expanding some things. And then a month after I asked the commissioner that question, I was told I was not being brought back.
I heard that.
So,
go ahead.
Connect the dots.
Yeah.
All right. Well, since you mentioned James Baldwin, that gives me a good segue into we have some people here from a program called Baltimore Reads, Nicole Johnson, and their reason for being is to get young people in Baltimore start reading, and they need books. So I told them I would give them a few minutes to just talk about that and see what they can persuade us to do. So Nicole, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Prince, for having me this evening. I really appreciate this entire conversation. It's a privilege to be able to listen in and get more information and more insights about what's happening in journalism for Black journalists and photographers. So my name is Nicole Johnson. I am the founder and CEO of Baltimore Read Aloud. And at Baltimore Read Aloud, we are all about raising readers and promoting diverse books for children and teens. I grew up in Miami, Florida. So as you were talking about the Miami Herald and Miami Times, and from Coral Gables to Opelika, I grew up in Opelika, so I was like, oh, I know that story. My mom raised me to be a reader, and I am really appreciative and grateful for all that she did to make books a part of my life and a part of my growing up. And my work in Title I schools, I've seen firsthand how difficult it can be for families to buy books on a tight budget. And every day I meet teachers and parents who struggle with finding books that children will enjoy or even be able to relate to because they can't relate to the characters or they can't relate to the story. Research tells us that growing up with almost no books at home is associated with literacy levels at about 50% below average. And yet having at least 80 books at home raises literacy levels to average, and we can definitely do better than average. I believe that every family, regardless of socioeconomic status, deserves a home library. This fall, my company launched the 100 Book Home Library Campaign. And we are working with local schools and nonprofit partners to host a community-wide book drive with the target of getting 20,000 new books donated so that 200 families can set up their own home libraries for the new year. What makes our book drive unique is the diverse representation featured in our curated wish lists. Book drive donors and sponsors are invited to choose from a catalog of books featuring characters and authors that are diverse racially, socially, and culturally. We are not afraid to recommend the books that others are attempting to ban. I need your help to spread the word about the book drive, but more importantly, to shift the public conversation away from banning books to raising readers. What we start in Baltimore and across Maryland has the potential to set fire to literacy and equity efforts across the country. I've placed some links in the chat for you where you can get more information about the campaign and about Baltimore Read Aloud. It also includes a link to our catalog of books. So if you want to get a feel for the books that we're recommending and that we're offering as part of the book drive, I welcome you to take a look at the catalog. Thank you. Thanks again, Mr. Prince, for having me here. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but just really appreciate this opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you, and good luck with your efforts there. We're running out of time. We have just 8 minutes left till 9 o'clock. I want to just mention, find out from people who have not introduced themselves, not said anything, if they would like to introduce themselves and have any thoughts on what they've heard today. Who hasn't said anything? Oh, Craig Herndon. Okay.
Mute.
Go ahead.
Do I have
Yes.
me?
Yes.
You tied it all together, and I didn't participate in Matt's part, but I had a offline back and forth with Amel about how Blacks go about promoting themselves, getting hired, moving up in the newsroom, and that segued into Trotter's issues of people in management position and visible positions. And it's not funny. I mean, it's your intent, I'm sure. But I was hired at the Post a week after the riots because my friend Ivan Brandon called me and told me he had been promoted to reporter. He was working as a copy boy and was enlisted to work the streets as a reporter with a number of other people in the Post newsroom. And I'd gone with pictures. They weren't very good. A gentleman told me if I wanted to work in the newsroom, I should go down to the what's the HR office now and fill out an application to become a copy boy because we used to be raised in the business. I think young journalists still have to learn journalism on the fly. You go to school and then you go out and then you learn journalism. You think you know it, but you don't know it until you've practiced it. And I worked as a news aide for a long time and had applied a couple of times for internships. And then a group of people, the Metro 7, of which Richard was part, filed a complaint about the Washington Post hiring practices. That went through a lot of roundabout, all around Robin Hood's barn, but eventually in 1972, I was inducted into an internship program as a result of that process. And later on, I asked the editor who started the same time I did, Bill Snead, why he hired me, And he says, I didn't hire you. He says, Ben Bradley told me I had to hire you.
Ah.
And so for Mel's sake, there's a chain of things that go on here. And yeah, Matt was a very large, how can I put it, imposing figure in the photo department. Matt was stolid, I guess maybe is the kind of word, and he could be quiet. But everybody knew he had power. And I saw a couple of times he could get really angry too. But,
I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. This is for you too.
I know my dad.
We'll get a chance to talk about it this weekend, okay? A position came open, and it would end up being the number 3 position in the photo department. But I took on eventually the management of 25 plus people, which included almost 25 photographers and probably 5 or 6 other staff. And the big deal was Matt gave me his trust, and he promoted me to that position. I applied for it. He didn't ask me to come get it. I mean, I put my name in the hopper with a number of other people who weren't happy that I got the job. And I did it for 3 years. And I think what Matt gave me was his confidence. He says, okay, I believe in you. The same thing had happened earlier when I was a news aide. Steve Isaacs, who had been the Metro editor, saved me from going off a springboard, a high board, as a matter of fact. And he said, why don't you come on down and work in the magazine? Because he had his own issues and was going to manage the Washington Post Sunday magazine. So this trail of people who trust you, who listen to you, or the people who stand up for your rights, even though it's not for you specifically, because it's for an idea. And Mr. Trotter, I honor you for going through that process, because it does eventually pay out for somebody. And it paid out for me. And so thank you, all you guys, but that's my little piece of this.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you.
Christian Spencer, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay, well, do you want to tell us who you are and do you have any comments to make about anything you heard?
Well, my name is Chris. I'm a freelancer. I freelance for Newsday currently, and I work for a Black publication called Fenora, which does like personal finance stories. In terms of like what I've learned so far, or what I come to appreciate is there's just a lack of diversity in all across the parts in journalism, especially photojournalism. I realize photography is a very important element in storytelling. It's also like just the story grabbing element into the stories when you get published. So being able to take credit for that, I think diversity is a really must have.
Okay. Anthony Wilson, newly retired, living the life.
That's right. Thank you, Richard. Anthony Wilson, recovering anchor and reporter at WTVD. Whoa, what did the light come on like that for? Hold on. My cat is at work here. That's good.
And he also
too.
runs the student projects at NEBJ.
I'm one of the people who works
One of
on
the
that,
people who runs the
yes.
student project.
And I'm the lead instructor at the short course at North Carolina A&T. So I'm still doing those things. So as always, Richard, thank you so much for including me in this roundtable. I always enjoy hearing from the people who have lots to say. I'm especially heartened by hearing about my hometown, the activity going on in Baltimore with that Baltimore Reads Aloud project. I have a few books lying around here that I could probably donate to that. And I will certainly spread the word about that very worthy cause. Kudos to the gentlemen who have so much to say about this business, gentlemen and ladies. and especially Leonard Pitts for showing that it is possible to have life after journalism. I'm looking forward to reading his novels, particularly the one we talked about tonight.
Thank you.
54 Miles. Okay,
Yes.
very good. Dawn Braceley, are you there, Dawn? Okay, you just see your name up there. Greg Morris, do you have anything briefly to say? Greg?
Oh, I'm here.
Okay.
This is Dawn Braceley.
Oh, Dawn, okay.
Oops, sorry.
Tell us who you are, and if you have anything you want to mention briefly about anything you heard today.
Oh, well, I really appreciated the conversation from a historical perspective, and I've always been a fan of Mr. Pitts and Mr. Pitts' writing. We used
Thank you.
your column on a regular basis in the Buffalo News.
Tell them where you work and everything.
Yeah, I'm one of the editorial writers at the Buffalo News.
Okay.
Yeah, and so when we saw that you were retiring, there was a collective awe, throughout our department, because we so really appreciated your prose. So I'm definitely going to purchase your book.
Thank you.
I want to thank. Oh, absolutely, and I want to thank you, Prince, for inviting me on the call as well. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, Greg Morris. Briefly, Greg. You're not there? Okay.
Sorry.
John Yearwood. Oh, you are there. Go ahead.
Sure. So I was hiding out. Yes. I had a lot to say,
but be brief though.
Okay. You're right. I'm going to say it at the next workshop.
Right.
I'll lay it out.
Or you can say it in the chat room.
Wow.
I'll say it in the chat room. I had a really great time. It was entertaining. It was very, very informative. It has me thinking about some things that I'm dealing with at Hunter College, where I'm an assistant professor. I'm very upbeat about it. I'm much more enthusiastic about things, and I'm shutting up right now, Richard.
Okay. I see that Jason Michael Johnson is showing us a photograph.
Matt, yeah.
Right, of Matt and fellow NEBJ Pulitzer winners. Was it 1990? Somewhere in there? Okay. All right. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate that. And thank you, Craig, for supplying that. Who's next to John Yearwood?
Hey, Richard, another great roundtable. I'm John Yearwood, editorial director at Politico. Great seeing some of my friends. Worked with Leonard Pitts for many years at the Miami Herald. And as I told him in the chat that at a house party in Miami on Friday, someone mistook me for him.
All right.
I told Leonard that it was a high honor, and he said I am too easily honored. But I'm really looking forward to purchasing and reading the book. And I thought what I thought that was great about this particular roundtable, Richard, and I have missed the last couple, but I just love the idea that there were several different entry points, different subjects that you talked about. So I thought it was really well-rounded. I also just want to take a minute to mention that at Politico, one of the things I'm in charge of is our early career programs. And we have internships and our fellowship program, and applications are out right now.
Are photographers included in that too?
I'm sorry?
Photographers, are they included?
Oh, as a matter of fact, we just had our first photography intern, and I was just asked today if we could extend her for another internship, for another session. So we'll be talking about doing that in the next coming days. So this is all really, really interesting conversation. Right. But we had, and this is an interesting point. It was the first time we had a photography intern, and we had almost 100 applications for that one slot. So when you talk about the need for more organizations to make these opportunities possible, there really is a lot of interest out there. So and the person who we hired was so far has been very, very successful, and there's a good chance that we're going to keep her for another extend her internship.
You're here.
But that said, just want to thank you again, Richard. This has been really eye-opening, and it took a lot to spend the night with you instead of Kamala. but
it'll be on C-SPAN.
Yeah, right. She'll be on you should be on C-SPAN, as a matter of fact.
Well,
but that's a different discussion.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you,
Thanks,
John.
Richard. I'll talk to you later.
Okay. Who's on iPhone? iPhone? Nobody? Okay. Robin, did you want to say anything? Robin Wilson Glover? No? Okay.
Yurla's on the iPhone.
Oh, Yurla. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear us, Yurla?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Well, tell us who you are. And did you have anything you wanted to say about anything you heard tonight?
Oh, I was really interested in that project. I'm sitting here looking at my computer. I can't remember what the name of, was it
Baltimore Read Aloud?
No, was it News Literacy Project?
The Pen America Project. Pen America.
Pen America. Okay, so I can find it online.
PEN America.
Pen
so
America.
Tim Richardson is here, and you can get him in the chat room.
Okay, I'm using my phone, so I can't use the chat room right now because
Well, you
I
can
didn't
hook
want to
up with
miss
him.
it and I was driving, so
we'll
that's
give
why.
you the contact information.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, and then anyways, I wanted to say, even though I'm not a journalist anymore, I'm still a journalist. I can't believe how much I talk about being in journalism to people today who are talking about this election. And I always have to remind people, you need to not watch, but read. Yeah. Watch your local news station and read your local newspapers, because you can't keep looking at people's opinions. Draw your own conclusions. But yeah, it's really hard because I'm a substitute teacher during the day and then I do my sports history. So anyways, I appreciated this, and hopefully I'll be invited back to another one, Mr. Prince.
All right. Very good. Of course. All right. Robin Wilson Glover.
Sorry, I don't have my last name there. I met Richard years ago. I won't say how many, at the Democrat and Chronicle in Rochester. Right. So I'm an alum from there. I just retired 2 months ago from the newsroom at the Star Ledger, otherwise known as NJ.com. Was on the editorial board there and director of opinion. So I really hated that Mr. Pitts left the columnist business as well. It's not easy finding an intelligent Black voice. There's plenty of Black voices out there. But I really missed your columns.
Thank you.
And thank you for inviting me, Dick.
Okay, very good. All right, Janine Cummins is here. She's taking photographs for us in lieu of Sharon Farmer.
Hello, my name is Janine Cummins, and I'm with the Exposure Group. As Richard said, I'm filling in for Sharon today, taking some images. I really just do some freelance work, events and things like that. I live vicariously listening to some of your stories. And, a lot of you have been in books my photography books that I have. So it's just great to be in this situation. And I'm kind of a news junkie, so I'm looking at a little bit of everything all the time.
All right. Sheila Solomon.
Good evening. Thank you for asking me to say something. Of course, I enjoyed the evening as always, and I'm glad I could sit through all of it this time. Usually I have to run away. Leonard, I'm definitely buying this book too. I've enjoyed all the others, so can't wait for this one.
Thank you. Let me know what you think.
I will. I absolutely will. And if I may, I'll just say one thing about what I'm doing these days. My podcast with ARP gets the second season. So that will launch in January, I believe. And so I'm looking forward to that. It's been a lot of fun and meeting a lot of cool people, very interesting older adults.
All right. Coach Nick, first timer.
Thank you for having me. So I'm a business coach. I work with social enterprises that want to make money by doing good for people and people in the community. So I work with Nicole Johnson on this, her business to have 100 curated brand new books for 200 student households in Baltimore schools and nonprofits. And so I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be on and listen to these great stories and these distinguished people, but also to be very clear about the ask, which is if you would go to the website that Nicole posted in the chat and actually buy some books, because those books will be donated, brand new books donated by authors who look like us for kids who look like us, and they're curated so it can develop the whole child. So STEAM, fun for reading, entrepreneurship, financial literacy, the whole gambit you'll find. So we really could use your support for you to go to the website, buy some books that could be donated to the kids. We want to get the kids those books before Christmas. So we appreciate if you would support. And thank you again for having me. Hopefully I can come back.
All right. All right, Jackie Green, who's producing this website.
Good evening, and thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you to all the panelists. It was an amazing Zoom this time, as always, and thank you all for your participation and staying with us. I know if you were in Washington, you probably wanted to get down to the ellipse, but I'm glad you were able to spare us a few minutes and join us here. We really appreciate you. And just for some of you, I'm Jackie Green, formerly of USA Today. I was actually photo director there. Jason's on to, and at the Boston Globe and St. Pete Times. I was a little bit disappointed that, the bar hasn't moved a lot. Since I was by myself when I was at St. Pete Times for 8 years, and now at the Boston Globe, I was the only black photographer there, and then came to USA Today. You'd think that the numbers would have changed some over that period of time. And I understand the business is changing and it's shrinking, and that we have to acquire new skills and adjust with it. And I progressed through and went to technology. So I've always been, at that point, a tech person and always looked for the new thing to do. And I remember talking with AS&E about diversity when I was Unity president. And the thing that people had trouble with is that in order to cover the communities to be fair, accurate, and balanced, then you need to have representation of the entire community, because you require diversity of opinion. And as said earlier, the people making the decision on what you see has great influence on how you do other things. And I was going to say vote, but of course we know that here. So I hope that we figure this out and that we continue to work at creating representation so that all communities will be represented in the news that's reported and consumed by all of us. And it looks like and feels like all of us.
Here, here, here. Okay. Benita Bing. Are you there, Benita?
Yes. Good evening. Somebody has
Oh, you're getting an echo.
Yeah, somebody's iPhone need to mute their phone.
Okay.
Getting feedback. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Benita Bing. I am the president of the Exposure Group, African American Photographers Association, located here in Washington, D.C. And I just received my 40 years of service with the Senate yesterday. Can't believe it's been 40 years.
40 years of what?
Of service at the Senate.
Oh my goodness. All right.
Time flies when you're having fun, Benita.
Some of it was fun, some of it wasn't so much fun, but I survived. Only the strong survive. At the last plantation.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Did anyone else want to say anything before we wrap this up? Jason, did you want to say anything else?
Hey, Richard,
You.
can I ask if Leonard is still on? When is he
Yes.
going on tour for the book, and if he knows yet where he's going?
Well, Leonard is still on, and they don't do they don't do book tours so much these days. Not like like even when my first book came out, and I spent the month of June traveling the country. But I've already done a number of cities. I've done Baltimore, I've done DC, I did LA, and I did Asheville, North Carolina. Did Miami, but I'll be back in Miami next month for the Miami Book Fair, and I'll be in Tucson in the spring. I could give you the exact date if you want. But I'll be in. Okay, hold on a sec. I'll have to.
For Miami, especially Miami. Thank you.
And how about the Midwest?
Like I said, it's kind of hit and miss these days. I wish they send me to Kansas, because I know I have a big readership in Kansas. Let's see here. I'll be in Miami the 22nd through the 24th. I think my event is on the 23rd. That's at the Miami Book Fair. And Tucson. Let me see if I can give you that date. Hold on, my calendar.
Let's go, Yearwood.
Let's bring up Tucson. Hold on here.
Okay, that's a deal.
I'm searching.
Dinner's on you, though.
Fair enough.
March 15th and 16th, 2025, I'm in Tucson.
All right.
Yeah,
Jason, you want to say something?
I just want to say something to Kevin. I will be in touch with the family, and I don't know whether you all have a copy of the photos that I showed, but I'd be more than happy to.
Yeah, I saw the two. Yeah, I may have that, but we're celebrating that this Saturday coming the 2nd in McDonald, Pennsylvania.
Right.
So, but I have a plethora of pictures that I do have that Dad has passed me through a line. Of course, we've taken throughout the years of each other and family members. So, but a lot of I found one of Don Graham when Dad won the Eugene Meyer Award. I sent those to Don Graham just the other day. I had a great conversation with him last week.
So these was from 1990, NABJ's first class of Hall of Famers, and also recognizing the first group of Black Pulitzer winners was one that was taken, and that very shot is now in the Gordon Parks Museum in Fort Scott, Kansas.
Oh.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay.
Really appreciate it. Yes.
All right.
And one more thing, Jackie, the video that was running before the actual Zoom began, is that going to be on this recording, or is it going to be available separately?
Well, Jackie, why don't we show that? Those who want to see it, we can put it on now.
It was done by Lucian Perkins, a staff photographer at the Washington Post, hired by Pat Lewis many moons ago.
Okay.
When the Washington Post had a spine.
Okay, we can share that out again.
All right.
For all of you.
Meanwhile, thanks everybody for being here. See you next time. There will be a printout of the chat room comments that will go to everybody whose email address I have. Meanwhile, enjoy the video out of Matt.
God bless. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
All right. Let me start it over here one more time.
Five score years ago,
I was galvanized by his speeches. That's what made me think so very, very highly of Martin Luther King. I was in awe. I had a very difficult time even taking photographs. Then looking around and seeing the inspiration and the faith that people had and their hands in prayer. And I walked around and photographed this one black lady, and she had her hands up under her chin, and that look in her eyes and her face and that smile. It was just wonderful. It was very exciting. But Dr. King's speech, I have a dream, because that's what it's all about. I have a dream. The next time I photographed Martin Luther King, I was working for the Washington Post at that time, staff photographer. When I walked into the church, and the closer I got to the pulpit, I actually got palpitation of the heart. I was so excited. And when he raised his arm and the light cascaded up his arm right to his fingertips, I went click, and I captured on film my personal feelings of Martin Luther King. And that's my favorite. It will always be my favorite out of all the thousands I've taken. Most certainly, it was devastated me that 6 weeks later he was going to be shot down, assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. That was heart-wrenching. I was crushed, and then to be sent up to 14th and U. I photographed the first person looting a store right there at the corner of 14th and U. She didn't break the windows, had a bandana on her head, reached in to grab something. I don't know what it was. I had to fight the urge not to take the photograph. That caused tremendous pain. Here's a black female, and you just instantly, microseconds, you know why she's doing it. Her grandparents, her great-grandparents, what they've been through, and this is just all automatic. Like I say, in microseconds, do you take the photograph or don't you? But you're a news photographer, and most particularly since you're a black news photographer, oh yeah, you have to force yourself. Not only for that particular time, but for the next 4 or 5 days, had to take photographs. I had to force myself to take it. I had to force myself to take it. Force myself to take it. These images and thoughts running through your mind. You understand why they're doing it, yet you know it's wrong. The next day is pandemonium because you got fire engines wailing, you got tear gas being right not too far from 15th Street. You had the cavalrymen there, photographed them at 14 with bayonets, and still trying to overcome King's assassination. And the more you hear about it and who did it and so forth, the more angry you get. It's not frustration anymore, it's after his death, that was a shockwave. That was a shockwave. That's like setting off the atomic bomb. That was a terrible thing and a terrible loss. One of the great men of the 20th century. And as time passes by, some of these pictures I've seen that have forgotten long ago that I'd taken, I still have every now and then the images pop up in my mind, but to just see them again, and then you feel fortunate you got some important photographs. Not just great people, but the average person, the poor person. That's what excites me more. That's what excites me more than anything. Sad, but still hopeful. I'll always be hopeful, and I'll always keep the faith, regardless. Something I can't help. We've come a long way, mighty long way, and we still have a ways to go. But with Dr. Martin Luther King, I have a dream. Let's hope that his dream will eventually come to fruition. A lot of it has, and hope it continues on that upward path.
All right. Wow. That was very powerful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Glad we were able to show it.
All right, gentlemen, take it easy. See you
Okay.
next time.
Okay.
All right, see you next time.